Welcome all Rockstar Girls, parasites, scientists, and readers alike podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Hantz, with my co-host,
John Grimes. In today's episode, we are discussing Wilder Girls by Rory Power. We are thrilled to take a deeper dive into the world of Wilder Girls, so sit back, relax,
don't forget your shotgun and food rations,
and enjoy 42 minutes of science fiction, adventure, mystery, and drama. Welcome everyone to the second episode of 42 A Book Podcast. We will be starting this episode with our Read It and Weep It segment. In this segment, we discuss how the book made us feel. So Lindsay, how did the book make you feel?
It made me feel really bored the whole time. If I'm being completely honest, I'm not the biggest fan of this book. I felt like there was a whole bunch of nothing happening until the last 30 pages of the book.
I definitely can see where you're coming from with the being bored thing, but I don't really agree with you when you say it's the last 30 pages of the book. I would say it's more about up until page 150 is when the character building stops and the plot thickens, and so does the adventure sense of the book.
I mean, yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that aspect, but still I feel like even the parts that we had where they were a little bit more action filled, they actually didn't contribute much to the end plot, you know what I mean? And yeah. I feel like I was reading things that just weren't important, and why is this part of the story if I don't need it?
I mean, yeah, I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, I feel like all of the little snippets that we got with Welch throwing things into the ocean, and that contributing to them not being able to trust her, I feel like that all built up until when they saw her and Taylor at the Harker house, and then that went on to build up to when they were at the pier and the box came with the gas and Welch stabbed herself, and then that went on. I think it's just a big snowball effect of a book, and maybe you just kind of got bored within each plot point, you know?
Yeah, I can see that, but I do agree with the points on Welch. The chapters and parts with Welch in it did interest me, and I liked reading her character because in the end she turned out to be different than what we expected her to be. But yeah, I'm still not that big of a fan.
I disagree. Like I said, things did get take forever to start picking up, but overall I enjoyed this book a lot. I really appreciated the 150 pages that it took for things to start picking up. Yes, I started getting bored, but at the same time it helped me at least understand where things were going towards the end, you know?
Yeah, I guess I can see that, but I don't know. It's just I felt, I'm trying to word this right, but I felt like she was trying to develop a story, but it was just a whole bunch of nothing in my opinion, and I felt like a lot of what she was building didn't end up contributing to it didn't help anything, and it wasn't needed. There were points where I was reading and it did help me understand the characters more, and it did help me understand the plot more, but there were a lot of points where it's just it didn't help at all, and it wasn't needed, and it took me a lot to get through the book.
So what points are you talking about at that point?
I don't know. It's just kind of that's the thing is the whole book kind of muddles together that I can't even because I just can't pick out specifics because I was so bored my brain wasn't paying attention to specific points of the book, if that makes sense, when I was reading it. So the specifics I can't even pick out to you because it's just not there for me.
I have a question for you though.
Yeah.
Is the reason why it's all meddling together because you read along with an audiobook, so that kind of gave your brain time to like zone out and not really
It
remember
is
things?
possible, but when I usually like if I'm very careful when I pick audiobooks because I'm not the biggest fan on audiobooks because I tend to like drift off in my own mind space sometimes. But I was careful on making sure I paid attention to parts, and I think even if an audiobook lets my mind drift off, it's obviously not exciting enough to keep my attention. And there were points where my mind was like very very focused on the point because there was parts that were really exciting that I did enjoy, but most of the book my mind, it's just like it got so bored of the story I was like I can't even concentrate on it.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I was also super glad that most of the questions that I had at like the beginning of the book about the talks and like I know I texted you and I was like, when you get to chapter 17, text me because I have a question for you. But then by the end of that, my question was answered. And I just felt like that was really good that she kind of built this confusion at the beginning and then most of the questions were answered at the end. And I just really liked that.
I agree. I like how I do like how I was confused in the beginning. I know originally I didn't, but I liked how the questions were answered, and it was the talks ended up being something that I didn't expect. Like I thought it was just like this virus type of thing, and then it ended up being like a parasite, and that's just like I like that she did throw a twist in there and make it seem like it's not like a virus. It's not actually contagious. It's just like it. I like the way she did that. It was a good story in that way.
I also really liked how the parasite was turning the people like into part of the island, you know?
Yes, yeah.
That was
That was very interesting to me and kind of like hard to wrap my brain around. I
mhm.
don't know if that makes sense, but like it was just like the possibilities in my brain was just like wow.
Right. Like I think that's what makes this such a good example of science fiction is that like you're thinking like, oh, this couldn't happen, but you don't really know if it couldn't, you know? I don't know if
Right.
that makes sense.
I like her imagination in this because it's very different from something I've read before or seen on television or it's very different and I liked that element of the book.
Definitely, definitely. Um, so I have a question.
Yes.
What did you think about the ending?
I okay. So like when you mean the ending, do you mean like the last chapter, like the ending as a whole?
I mean, the resolution.
The resolution, I did not like it.
I
Um,
definitely agree.
because towards the end of the book, I started liking it more, and I was starting to like feel more connection to the book. But when I got to the last chapter, I was like, "There's no way this is like the
Hmm.
last chapter. There's so much more I need answered." And then by the end of it, I still felt like there was some things I needed answered and some things I needed that weren't resolved yet, Like
Right.
by it, I felt like her story was not resolved at all.
Hmm.
And like what happened like we got the talks out of uh Hetty, but like what happens to Reese, Like it just like there's a few questions I just had that like it felt like I needed a little bit more room to figure out what happened,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, my opinion on the ending was that it was a sweet ending, but a sweet ending doesn't necessarily mean that it was a good ending. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like the ending of the book was, like you said, just a giant plot hole. And
Yeah.
we don't really know where the three girls are escaping to after they escape from Raxter and what that holds for them. And I also wish like the author would have included um, like them seeing the island getting blown up by the jets because we don't really know if that ever happened. Um,
Yeah, one thing
also,
I that's been bothering me is like all the other girls, like they're gone, and like we never like should they just left them, and like they're just gone, and I
right.
just never figured out like did any of them survive? Like that's always bothered me.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like this ending just really irritated me even more because I know that this novel, as of now, is a standalone novel, and
Yeah,
there isn't going to be any more to the story of these three, and I just want more, and I
yeah.
don't have it.
I feel like she could have ended it like almost in the same way where they're like riding off into the distance, but like I just needed more. Like she should have explained more. There was more room to explain things, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Well, I guess we can go on to our next segment, which is the character connection segment, in which we talk about the characters we relate to the most.
So go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Which character did you relate to the most?
I related to Byatt the most out of all the characters because I feel like Byatt was just a really good character to relate to because she was the character that we really got to see into what her life was like before Raxter. Like how her mom treated her, how it kind of seems like her dad wasn't around. It was just very, like, knowing more about Byatt, she like dug her way into my heart rather than the other two.
Yeah, when I wrote down my notes in our document, I had originally said Reese, and then because she's just the character I gravitated the most in the book. But when I was writing down my notes, I did say maybe Byatt because I did feel like there was a part of me that had more of a connection to her because we had more of a backstory for her, and so I could pick either, but yeah.
Talking about, are you finished?
Nope, you go ahead.
Okay, so talking about Reese, I just wanted to mention that Reese was the fuel of my anger throughout this entire book. Like, I just felt like she was so stubborn, and she was stubborn for no reason, I felt, and I just feel like her character like didn't really develop. It just kind of switched, like just instantly, like all of a sudden her stubbornness was gone by the end of the book, and she was finally like empathizing with Hetty and Byatt. I just didn't really like Reese.
Yeah, I do not like how Reese was developed throughout the book. I will say that, but she is the character I liked the most. She was not how I expected her to be in the beginning. Like you said, she was kind of very like standoffish in the beginning and just kind of rude in the beginning, but in the end I ended up liking her. I think the reason why she's so stubborn is because I don't like Hetty, but the way like Hetty like talked to her at some points, like when the part that really angered me is when Hetty had killed her father, and Hetty was like yelling at her and being completely rude when she just she's not realizing she just killed her father in front of Reese's eyes, and that's like a lot to take in. And that really like fueled my anger for Hetty in this book, is she just doesn't empathize with anybody, and she doesn't have any she just doesn't have very much compassion for others. And I think Hetty puts her in a lot of positions where she has to be stubborn and she has to be a little bit hard-headed.
Yeah. I disagree with you that Hetty was in the wrong when Reese, when they had that little quarrel about Reese or Hetty killing Reese's dad, because I feel like basic human reaction to seeing a person die that you haven't seen for a year and a half, like even if they were your closest family member, like I just wouldn't be very empathetic. And maybe that's just me, but I definitely see where Hetty is coming from, where like she's not really seeing Reese's, like why she's so angry, because one, it wasn't really her dad, it was the parasite controlling him. And it just, I think I got a completely opposite viewpoint than what you got.
I mean, I can see that, but like also you have to think from like Reese's point of view. She thought her dad was dead for like a year, and then he comes back out of nowhere, and she's like, "I finally have my dad back," and then he's dead within 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's,
and it's just like true. It's a lot to go through. I think it's a lot emotionally to go through within that short amount of period of time, and just for Hetty to not like try to understand where she's coming from. Like at some point I like agree with Hetty where like she needed to get Reese out of there, they needed to go, but like she was yelling at her for no reason. It was a fight that like it didn't really need to be there, they didn't really need to fight about that.
Yeah, and I also feel like Reese just wasn't really paying attention to the fact that like Hetty saved her life. Like her dad was going to kill her and she saved
Yeah,
her. And I feel like that was really overlooked by Reese.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So this definitely brings us to our third segment. So Lindsay, what parts of the book stood out to you for our standing ovation segment?
The best part was the like last few chapters for me, because like maybe like the last like 50-30 pages, I guess, because I felt like I was connected to the characters more, and I felt like I felt the urgency of the situation, and I felt like there was an actual plot that was being driven, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like there was an actual problem and we were trying to solve it, and I liked how quick paced it was,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I just think the last part really stood out to me, and I liked the last part of the book.
The parts that stood out to me were the parts where we were looking at Byatt's view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked the long indentations and pauses because it made me feel like I, as the reader, was slipping in and out of consciousness with her, with the character. And
Yeah.
I feel like that was just really executed perfectly because I could just visualize in my mind exactly what she was seeing, what she was thinking, what was being said. It was so perfect to read. It was like literary gold for me. It just slipped through my fingers and I loved it.
Yeah, I really liked the first time we were in her point of view, where like she really wasn't like, there wasn't really anything going on in her brain, and I did feel what she was feeling in that part, because like you said, the way she was slipping in and out of consciousness, it really did bring me to that like to her state of mind, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I did like that part.
So with this, what were your favorite and least favorite part? Well, since we just said our favorites, what was your least favorite part of the book?
Uh Definitely the beginning. Uh like I said, I felt like there was like, there's just not a bunch going on, and I wish there we had some more in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like how there's no character development in this book at all. That
There's
really,
really not. Their character, I don't even want to call it development. It's just like their personalities switch like a light switch. It's so binary.
yeah, the character development is terrible. Um, and I also don't like how we're kind of supposed to feel like, I guess, feel like bad for Welch in the end. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't. I feel like she was trying to get us to feel bad for Welch, but in the end, like that was such like a cowardly act to like just like not try to help, you know,
Mm-hmm.
just to give up.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I I see where you're saying like the author might have been like pushing for us to feel bad for or sympathetic towards Welch and her situation, but at the same time, I feel like it's hard for the readers to feel sympathetic towards Welch when like even Hetty doesn't feel sympathetic towards Welch.
Yeah.
Like she understands that what Welch was doing was wrong. And speaking of Welch, I would just like to say that Welch was the absolute least favorite character of mine. I absolutely hated her. She was the most flawed character, and with there being no character development, she stayed flawed. And I was just
Mm-hmm.
so frustrated when like reading any parts that she was um concerned in. Like she was so weak minded and she let the headmistress control and manipulate her, and that manipulating ended up leading to her suicide on the pier in front of teenage girls that she was supposed to be looking after. Like
Right.
she's been so broken down by headmistress, and I just cannot stand Welch. Like if she wanted to stand up and protect the girls from being tested on by the CDC or Camp Nash, she should have stood up to headmistress and recognized that what she was doing was wrong. And along with headmistress being in the wrong, Taylor was also, I could not stand her because she sat around
Right.
and she tried to act like she was helping the girls, and she manipulated them into thinking that something bad happened on a boat shift when that didn't happen at all. She was just trying to get off the island and save her own. And I cannot stand that.
Right. And I think it even bothered me more with Taylor, because she was like in Headmistress, where they were like, we have to like get off the island, but like they knew nothing about these hawks, right? So they didn't know if it was contagious. They didn't know like what they were risking by doing that, not only leaving a whole bunch of people who needed them, but also endangering a whole bunch of people they're going to see when they leave the island. And that really like I was just like, really? Like how selfish can someone be?
Exactly. And speaking like at the point of their selfishness, when they gathered all of the girls into the music room, took Reese, locked the door, and started gassing the girls, that made me feel sick to my stomach. Like, how selfish can you be to waste who knows how many people's lives, teenage girls' lives, over your own, you know? Especially headmistress being the adult.
Right. It really struck a chord when at some point, like after that, Hetty had said that it was a lot of the people that had died because of that were the little girls, the littlest ones. And that was like, wow. And headmistress really like made me mad because she's like such a weak character, and yet she's like supposed to, I feel like she's supposed to look at like this strong like evil villain, but like I've always seen her as like such a weak character.
She definitely is very weak, especially like when she saw that like the girls, not all of the girls were killed in the gas, and she started pouring the gunpowder into the water bottles. That I feel like that actually was a perfect tie to the beginning when Hetty was talking about like how headmistress and Welch and the other older gunshift girls had taught them how to break open the bullets so that they could kill themselves if needed. And I feel like that was really tied, like the thing that they were supposed to use to keep them safe and, you know, like keep them from suffering was going to make them suffer the most in the end.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that, but that's a good juxtaposition. Yeah. Is any of these characters in this book, honestly.
Yeah,
the character development just like really threw everything off. I just wish we had more of it. I wish we had some of it, really.
Yeah. I just wish that there was another novel to go with this, like, because I just feel like the story just built up and then dropped off. Like it
felt very rushed towards the end.
Yes, we were just walking up a hill at first, slowly, and then we started running and picking up pace, and then the hill just turned into a cliff, and we dropped to our death, and the story was done. Like, I need more. I need a bridge over to another cliff, another hill, and keep going.
Yeah. I feel like there was definitely, it's not a very big book, so I feel like we definitely had room to elaborate more on the ending. And I feel like there are other parts she could have cut down if she needed to and elaborated more on the ending. I felt like the last chapter in particular felt very rushed, especially since it's like a chapter where we find by it, and then it's like the end.
Exactly. Like, I don't know about you, but after reading this book, like, I just needed to read something else because my mind just wasn't at rest with like making my own theories, blah, 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 blah. So I pulled out my Kindle and I started reading our next book for next week just to get my mind off of Hetty, Reese, and Byatt and the other Raxter girls in this story because I'm just so devastated that there's not another story.
Yeah, I normally like when I finish a book, I usually have this like complete feeling in the book where like it's almost like I want to go back and reread it all, and I just didn't have that feeling in the end because I felt like it wasn't like tied up in a nice little bow and wrapped up, you know. I felt like the end just didn't feel right to me, and I feel like that also is what kind of fuels my dislike for the book, is because once I started liking it, it really just took a downhill again.
I definitely understand that.
All right, so let's move on to our last segment, which is the Corner of Contention segment. In this segment, we talk about an element of the book that we disagree about. So I think what we disagree about the most when looking at our notes was how we think the story was told.
Yes.
So I don't like how the story was told at all. I feel like there was no real problem until the last part of the book.
Right.
I felt like I was reading just like a whole bunch of nothing until the last few chapters. I didn't like the ending, like we said. And I felt like there wasn't enough to make the story wrapped up. And I felt like I know you feel the opposite on this, but I feel like some parts needed to be described more and fully because I just feel like some parts of my mind was confused on what was happening, and I just needed more description.
Yeah, I definitely disagree with you about pretty much all of what you just said. Because like I said earlier, this book, it wasn't like just all action or all boring. It was like little snippets of action mixed in with boring, but the little snippets of action like built into this big ball at the end. But I definitely understand with what you're saying, like towards the ending, because like I said, like that big ball just kept rolling up the hill and then fell down.
Yeah.
So I want to speak about the narrative of this book as it being in first person. I really struggle with reading in first person narratives. I don't know why. It should be the easiest, but it's the hardest for me to put myself in another person's shoes in like a science fiction or fantasy world. But I felt like how the girls talked with each other and their superiors, quote unquote superiors, being headmistress and Welch. It was all very realistic. It was like, it was how
I agree.
anyone being in this situation would act if they were in the shoes of the girls at Raxter. I also really, really, really enjoyed how Rory Power described every single thing that was going on. I feel like I said last episode with Cassandra Clare, she wasn't giving enough, but in her books now she gives way too much. And I feel like Power really found that happy medium of giving me too much and not giving me enough. And it's really what I've been waiting for 16 years of reading. I've just been wanting this happy medium, and I finally got it.
See, that's where I disagree. I feel like there wasn't enough for me, and I don't know why. It's just like I felt like I couldn't picture it in my mind, and I feel like that's where my issue was. And if I can't picture it in my mind, I feel like I'm not getting enough. And there were some points where I was able to like get a great picture in my mind, but like when I'm comparing it to like my favorite books, like it's just not the same to me.
I would also like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Did you know that like this book took place during the fall or like near winter?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Because at the end when it said like it started snowing, I was like, wait a minute. Why is it snowing? I've literally thought about this book being in the summertime this entire time. Like, this makes absolutely no sense to me. So that was the only part that I was like really confused on towards the end. But I guess I just didn't pick up.
It was in the beginning when she was talking about like all the stuff they get from the CDC, and she was talking about how they get coats a lot, and she was talking about how it would just become like fall time or winter time, or how it just started to get colder or something like that. And so that's where I knew it was winter.
Right. That makes sense.
Because I had always imagined it to be like cold. I feel like even if I hadn't been told, I would have imagined it to be cold because it's just like an eerie book, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like the winter was a good time to put it
in. Now that you say that, like all the frost being on the ground definitely makes sense to me. So there's another part that we disagreed on a whole lot, and that was our star ratings on Goodreads. So for our listeners, after we finish a book, we rate the amount of stars out of 5 that we give the book on Goodreads, which is a reading app that you can track your books. I know I gave a 4 out of 5. Lindsay, what did you get?
I gave it a 2 out of 5.
Why did you give this book a 2 out of 5?
Okay, well, I was sitting there and I was like, it's either a 3 or a 2. And I know that I rated City of Bones a 3 out of 5. And I said to myself, I did not like this book as much as I like City of Bones. So I gave it a 2 out of 5.
So you rated this book based on other books that have absolutely nothing to do with this book.
I based it off of my enjoyment. And when I compare it to my enjoyment on other books,
It just wasn't
I
there.
did not enjoy it as much. And so, it's a 2 out of 5 for me.
Well, I rated it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads because this book I think I started reading it on, it was either Monday or Tuesday of this week. I know I was definitely behind schedule, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get this book finished, especially being like the slowest reader on the planet. But when this book started to pick up, I really couldn't put it down. But I didn't like the ending at all. And the shallowness of like the characters that we got and the character development that we got, which there was no character development at all. It just, that was what really missed it for me to give this book a 5 out of 5.
Yeah, I think like I said in the beginning is very, very slow, and I can appreciate a slow beginning. Like my favorite book of all time has a very, very slow beginning, but I felt like I wasn't like rewarded in the end, And so for that, it just like it really knocked it down for me. And yeah, it felt like there was no plot. If I'm being honest, I felt like there was no plot the whole time until the very, very end. And I like to have a plot, and like you said, like last episode, the way you like rate if you like a book or not is how you feel, if you feel trapped or like you're imprisoned by the book. And I felt imprisoned by this book so much. I did not want to read it. I know I literally finished it last night, and it was something I couldn't finish. And I think that's bad when it comes to me reading a book, is if I don't want to finish it, I obviously am not enjoying it enough.
Yeah. For this book, when I was like deciding if I enjoyed it or not, I was like, am I pushing myself to read this, or am I going back and rereading things in deeper detail so I find a deeper understanding? Because I know that if I want a deeper understanding of something, it most likely means I liked it. And that's what I was doing. I would be halfway down a page and I'd be like, wait a minute, this doesn't really make sense. I must be drifting off. So I'd flip back to the page before and I just reread it all so I could get a better understanding of what was happening.
See, yeah, I would do the same thing for most books, but this book just didn't have me going back and figuring out what was happening. It's just like I did not care because it did not interest me whatsoever. And okay, I would be honest with you, this is the first time I'm reading like a horror book, so maybe horror books are just not my cup of tea. I'm not gonna like stop reading them like from this book, but it's my first type of this genre, and maybe it's just me being exposed to this first, but right now I am not a fan.
So we are talking a lot about things that we don't agree on. So you wrote something on number 10 on our notes, and I really agree with you on this. So would you like to share what that was?
I said that I felt like none of the relationships in this book were developed very well. Like one thing that really like kind of caught me off guard was when they were in the forest and Hetty and Reese kissed, because I had gotten the impression that it was Byatt and Reese.
Yes.
And I felt there was no connection between Reese and Hetty at all.
It just happened out of nowhere.
It just happened out of nowhere. And I did end up kind of liking the relationship later on. But then even when they like got in that fight and then kind of, I guess, resolved it in the end, they never really had a talk about it. And I felt like we needed to know where the relationship stood, and like I feel like they needed to talk about the relationship, and they never did. It was just kind of like, I don't know, it's just that relationship in particular really kind of ticked me off, because I felt like there was no development. It came out of nowhere. And kind of the same with a little bit with Teddy and Byatt. I didn't like that either. I was like, what?
I feel like
that one I kind of liked more than Teddy.
I liked it a little bit more, but at the same time, I didn't have enough information on Teddy to really make an opinion about him. And I just feel like the development of the relationships is definitely going to go hand in hand with the character development of the whole book. And maybe that's why we're lacking in just the big, broad section of development, because all across the board, throughout all 354 pages, there just wasn't any development at all.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just the relationships just were not developed very well. And I wish they were, because I feel like if they had been developed a little bit more, I probably would have liked the characters a lot more, and I probably would have liked the book a lot more, because I feel like a lot of times relationships drive the book and make me like the book.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just another thing that knocked a star off.
Right. So I feel like we should kind of take a break from talking about this, and we should kind of explain like what's going on with our podcast. So if you follow our Instagram and Twitter, you will know that we posted the schedule of our season, and our season is going through June 8th, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
So for the next 2 weeks, we are going to be kind of taking a break from the books made for older kids, I guess. We're going to be reading more young adult things. I'm not going to say what they are because that's a surprise. But in, I do believe, our 4th week and 5th week of our podcast, we are going to have special guests. And with our special guest episodes, those episodes are going to be longer than 42 minutes. We're not, so on my notes page, I have each segment is a certain amount of time. We're not going to do that. We're just going to let ourselves conversate, because there's going to be 3 of us instead of 2 of us. So it's going to be harder to control and condense it down into 42 minutes. And I'm very excited because our special guests are 2 of our best friends. And I'm just so excited to read with them and converse with them. And Lindsay, do you have anything you'd like to add on that subject?
I think with special guests, it's going to be a cool opportunity to like take inside a non-reader's mind and how they like take a book as they read it, because I feel like we definitely analyze things a lot more than normal people do, and I feel like it's going to be fun to see what they pick up on versus what we pick up on.
Exactly. I would, just to like give you guys a few little hints at what we're reading this season. So we are kind of focusing on we are definitely focusing on the fiction aspects of things. I'm going to tell you there is going to be a read of City of Ashes, the second in in the Mortal Instruments series, but I'm not going to tell you when, so like you can't guess. But we're also going to be talking about more science fiction things. We're going to be diving deep into fantasy, and the one that I'm most excited for is our season finale, and that is our historical fiction, because I've been waiting to read this book for so long, and I'm just so excited to read it.
I'm very excited to read it. I would like to add that the other day we were talking about how when we do approach series, we're going to start deeming them worthy, whether we're going to like continue reading them or not. So we will make sure we include that in each episode.
Right. And I think how we should kind of deem whether if they're worthy or not is how much like outreach and feedback we get towards the books in the series. You know what I'm saying? Like if we're getting more if we're getting noticed more for one book series over the other, we're definitely going to continue with that, because that's what the listeners like. But we also are going to need to push through with these standalone novels, and we're going to have to find novels to replace them. So I know Lindsay, the other day, maybe yesterday, you posted on our Instagram story asking people for recommendations on books to read. So if you have any recommendations of any books that you would like us to read and discuss, maybe talk about the books with our friends, just go onto our Instagram or Twitter at 42_book and just leave us a suggestion or DM us, private message us. I just want us to have a larger connection with our listeners.
Yeah. The suggestion box is like still open on the highlight too. If you'd rather do that than like not DMing, you can do that. there's many ways you can reach us.
Yes, I'm very excited for the future of this show.
Me too.
I've loved listening to podcasts like Crime Junkie and Witch Please.
That's my favorite.
I've always wanted to start a podcast, and now that we're here, I just want to make it the best that it can possibly be for everyone.
Yeah.
So, okay, back to Wilder Girls. I definitely think we need to talk about the headmistress just a little bit.
Okay.
So, what did you think of headmistress at the beginning of the book?
I feel like there wasn't very much of her, so I was just like, oh, she's just like a a teacher there, and she's like mentioned a few times throughout the book. I kind of didn't have enough to fully form an opinion on her.
Right.
So I didn't dislike her, but I didn't like her either.
Yeah. Going off of that, I didn't like how her evil side just kind of came out of nowhere, you know?
Yeah.
I just wish she would have been more of that villain that I wanted. The most schemy thing she did was, let Byatt go to the communication center that was a makeshift hospital and lead Mona out to the woods, but that she had Welch and Taylor do that. But we didn't really know that it was headmistress controlling everything. I just wish she would have been more of a schemy character than kind of hiding in the background and not really being suspicious at all.
Yeah, I feel like if we had a little bit more of her throughout the book, it would have been a bigger twist, and I would have appreciated it a little bit more. I just wish she was a little bit more prevalent throughout the book.
Definitely. Another thing that I would just like to touch on before we end is, so weren't Reese and Hetty mad at the headmistress about how and Taylor about how they were just going to up and leave everyone? And then didn't they just up and leave everyone the same way that headmistress and Taylor were going to do? That just angered me so much because it's just very hypocritical, and they were only watching themselves and they weren't looking out for any of the other girls.
Yeah, that angered me as well, as they just kind of left, and I was like, you were mad at headmistress for doing that, and you went and did the same thing.
Yeah. So I think on that angry note of this novel, I think this actually wraps up our episode for today. I hope you enjoyed your time with us today discussing Wilder Girls by Rory Power.
Come back next Monday, May 4th, for our discussion on The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan.
You can also find us at anchor.fm/42-book-podcast.
For more information, follow our Instagram and Twitter at 42_book.
We'll see you next week at 4:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This episode was brought to you by Anchor. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast and is at zero cost to use. Tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer allow you to expand the creativity of your podcast. Distribution has never been so easy, and it's done for you. Anchor distributes your podcast so it can be heard from Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more listening services. Anchor also allows you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's ANCHOR.FM to get started today.